Good morning for the Americas, good afternoon for Europe and Africa, and good evening for Asia. Thank you for joining us today for a web discussion on how to ensure the functional continuity of global diplomacy in time of crisis, some sort of business continuity discussion, which is often labeled. Over the last couple of days, we have been seeing a lot of impact on the COVID-19 on diplomacy. For instance, the European Council was the first to hold a video conferencing summit where they discussed how to coordinate European response to the current crisis. The European Union has also moved to email voting as a result of the current situation and impossibility for parliamentarians to travel to Strasbourg and Brussels. Similarly, the G20 leaders are also convened a video conference during which they discuss of course of action to be taken. Perhaps the most interesting of them all are the teleconferencing held by the UN Security Council. For the first time ever, the 15 member states adopted unanimously for resolution via email voting. We'll be hearing later on from New York about the details on that. We are also seeing some sort of innovation, novelty in climate change diplomacy ahead of COP 2060, where the UN climate change team has offered to book for negotiators hotels room with connectivity, strong connectivity in their respective countries. Therefore, instead of paying them for travel for the meetings, they offer to book the rooms with a good connectivity. Without any doubt, there are many developments which are profoundly changing the way we meet, negotiate, and conduct diplomacy. This is the backdrop for our discussion today. And today we have an excellent lineup of experts, practitioners, people who can give us unique insights on this question of business continuity for diplomacy. We have Dalsie Baniala from Palau's Telecommunications Regulatory Advisor. She's connecting from the Pacific. Mr. Imre Karbutsky, Director of Meetings and Publishing Division in the UN Department for General Assembly and Conference Management. Welcome. We have Mr. Mokhtar Yedali, Head of the Information Society of the African Union Commission. You can find their bios, details about their impressive careers on the website. Ambassador Stefano Baldi is joining us from Italian Embassy in Bulgaria. And Christian Roy, which is not very far from me here, is the first secretary at the Permanent Mission of Canada to the UN in Geneva and one of the first cyber diplomats covering digital policy issues per se. Before we go over to our speakers and hear from them their perspectives about this question of the business continuity for diplomacy, I would like just to invite you to fill the poll that we prepared in order to see what are the major issues related to business continuity among participants here in the room. It is displayed on the screen and you can fill that poll. Let us see. How did you adjust to remote works? It was a smooth transition. I often encounter technical issues, problem with internet connectivity. I'm often distracted by my family. Now there is a competition between smooth transition and the family. Okay. Many of you had a really smooth transition so far. Good. Therefore, we'll be hearing also from our audience reflections how the participants in the audience managed to facilitate a smooth transition. I'm sure there will be quite a few reflections on the distraction by family members, especially with our colleagues with young kids in the room. Now we go directly into discussion and we move to Pacific, to Vanuatu, where Dalsie is based. Dalsie, welcome and thank you for staying late in the evening. It's almost midnight in Vanuatu. Dalsie is connecting from Porto Villa in Vanuatu, and she has a long experience basically in working remotely because of the sheer geographical element. And what we'll like to hear from Dalsie. Dalsie, what could you share with us as, let's say, veteran of online meetings over the last at least 10 years since you have been participating in various digital policy discussions? Over to you, Dalsie.
Thank you, Dr. Jovan. First of all, I want to take this opportunity to, show condolence to those who have lost their lives and the loved ones during this horrible crisis, COVID-19. And I pray that, they share there's some comforts and blessings in their lives as they are experienced today. So back to the question that you have asked, what is reality? Yes, I have been part of online meetings since 10 years ago. And what has happening today during the crisis by having online meetings, especially with this group of the senior leaders, the G20, the European Union, making decisions online is a great example of reality to me, because in the remote or in the Pacific Island states, it hasn't been seen so much, or it hasn't been taken so seriously to make decisions on, especially in online meetings.
Thank you, Dalsie. One question is, do you have a feeling that the voice of Pacific Island states and small island states is heard in international discussion, or you have just the possibility to participate? Could you just quickly reflect on that point before we move forward to next speaker?
Thank you. From my experience in the last 6 years in executive functions, I can only be very frank that I think at the UN level, the voice is yet to be heard or even implemented. And I want to see more of the actions at the UN level, considering the views and the voices on specific matters in terms of connectivity, digital technology evolution, and so that we are also part of whatever decisions that will affect us in the Pacific region, for example, the small island countries. And I'll give you a classic example, because technology, the pressure of the global pressure of technology is impacting everyone. So if there are voices coming over from the Pacific countries or from the small island states, I feel there is more at the UN level on specific matters.
Thank you, Dalsie. That's an interesting point. If I get correctly, the fact that you can be connected and that e-participation has been reality for you for 10 years doesn't mean that voices from the small island states are heard enough in international meetings. We'll get back to that. We are now moving across the continents and the ocean at the other part of the, let's say, time zone that we are covering during this session, to Mr. Imre Karbutski. Imre is leading the efforts at the General Assembly to implement online meeting and e-participation tool. We'll later on relate to the participation of small island states, but let us hear from Imre. What's going on currently in General Assembly and the UN in New York, and what are the plans ahead of us? Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure to be in this global call. I would like to wish the best for you, for your families. I hope you're all managing and doing fine in this very difficult circumstances. So as for the UN, and not just New York, but at the other duty stations around the world, of course, we were prepared. We have our business continuity plans. We have our crisis management plans in place, but a real situation is always different from what those scenarios describe. So So this sort of a long-lasting and incrementally worsening situation is very difficult to prepare for. Apart from, of course, the crisis management operations, other pressures already prior to this current crisis were already forcing us to look into fuller use of the technological advancements. The issue of sustainable meetings and environmental issues, accessibility to give full access to participants, already prompted remote solutions to be looked into, but not everything was in place when this crisis started. For example, two major elements of holding a conference: documentation and meeting servicing, including interpretation. So documentation, of course, is more manageable. We are fully prepared to remote processing of documents, and that's been a daily routine before. On the other hand, meeting servicing with full benefits of interpretation is not something that we can offer at this stage. Obviously, we are feverishly looking into finding solutions, and we are testing as we speak several platforms, including this one, which is my first Zoom conference. So in a way, I'm also testing the technology here. But we don't have anything in place that we could just turn on and use. We looked into remote interpreting and service provision something like 2 years ago, but that was a different business case. We were looking at sharing capacities between established duty stations, and obviously now when the duty stations are either off limit or operate on a very, very reduced physical attendance regime, that's not a scenario we could pursue. So what happened is pretty much the charter bodies curtailed their operations. As you know, all the major conferences of the first half of the year got postponed. The big crime congress in Kyoto, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty Review Conference in New York, the big Oceans Conference in Lisbon, a Transportation Conference in Beijing, and many others. They all postponed, and we'll have to find out when they will take place. Within the next year or so, we hope to be able to hold them. And of course, the 75th anniversary session of the UN is looming in the background for September. So we are keeping our fingers crossed. So how the charter bodies adjusted the Security Council, the General Assembly, ECOSOC, they are conducting virtual meetings. This is normally exclusively done in English. For the time being, they adopted new voting procedures. It's in writing and in sort of a silent voting process they put in place, and they managed to function with this. Obviously, on a daily basis, we are feeling the pressure. The multilingual aspect of international diplomacy is lacking. We can produce the documents, but we cannot conduct the meetings in the 6 official languages, and that is my top priority, and that is one of our major concerns for the time being. What we expect, though, as the outcome of this, for the time being, following the US regulations, we are planning to be in this mode of operation until the end of April. As you know, the measures in place in the US for the time being until the end of April. So our time horizon is also for that. We are planning to keep this type of an operation aligned with the local, the host country regulations. But it's easy to anticipate that many of the new features that will be, that was already, that is now in place and that will be put in place, will survive this crisis and will become part of the new normal once we are back to our buildings in full use. Still, I think remote virtual meetings will take a lot bigger part in the immediate future and on the long run for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Imre, for indicating this question of new normal and possibility for innovation. In a way, don't waste the crisis and try to make meetings more efficient. You pointed to one extremely important aspect, which Dalsie hinted in her introductory remark already, that it is not just enough to have this type of meeting or Zoom, that it is broader ecosystem when you have documentation, interpretation, voting, procedures. Therefore, it is much more comprehensive task with technological challenges, but also with, I would say, policy, protocol, and diplomatic challenges. Therefore, good luck with navigating in this interesting waters, and I'm sure that today's discussion will give some interesting insights. Now, from Vanuatu to New York, and now we are moving to Addis. With us is Mokhtar Yedali, Head of Information Society at the African Union. Mokhtar, you in this survey, there was indicated there was a smooth transition from working in the office to working at home for majority of our participants. What is happening in Addis? How is African Union preparing, and what are your insights on this issue? Over to you.
You can really be hearing me very much. Oh, let me, sorry, I have to mute myself.
Yes.
Oh, I'm muted. Yes. First of all, I bet that most of those 56% of people, most of them are not in Africa, I am certain, because what is supposed to be given in a certain areas of the world is not really given everywhere else. I.e., and I explain myself, the connectivity or the business continuity require three major things. One is, first of all, the power supply. At home, at office, and wherever you are, which is granted, for instance, in many of the capital city, but not granted in every houses in the developing world. Second is reliable, secure connectivity with the appropriate bandwidth that is required, which is actually, if it is given somewhere else, it is not given really to any household. We are supposed to be the lucky ones. The lucky ones because we have not been affected, thanks God, and we hope that everybody will be like that. And we are the lucky ones because we are having electricity and we have connectivity, but it is not given to every houses. So the transition from office to the house is not, to my view, as smooth as it is or should be in Africa. Most of the time, people stay working extra hours in home, in the office, I'm sorry, only because in the office there is a good connectivity, or because there is a power. Myself, I lost today 2 hours in the morning simply because I didn't have electricity in my house in Addis Ababa. And that is the issue that it's across most of the continent. Now, the other issue that you have not probably addressed properly is the issue of language. You and I, our basic or mother language wasn't English. And we see the predominance of English in every single meeting that is being held. If I don't speak English, I am excluded. And that is most of the French-speaking countries. And you have most of the developing, the diplomats, most of the time cannot contribute to most of the meetings. It's simply because of the issue of interpretation. There are solutions to all of this. Solution number one with regard to connectivity, whenever you have approaching this business continuity, not only you have to look at the connectivity, but also you have to look at the electricity and power supply. In addition to the protocols and the workflows that is supposed to be done. Because most of the time, people may adopt technology, but they don't know what kind of protocol behind it, how to use it. If they will use technology by using the same protocols and the same workflows or their processes they were using in the analog or physical world, then there's no point to have at any point of time to have connectivity or to do transition. Second, the language issue. We need to develop more applications for simultaneous translations, learning machines, in order to be able for anybody to be able to participate in any meetings while he is not speaking the language that is being said there. At this point of time, I stop here and I'll be waiting for your further questions. Thank you very much, Johan.
Thank you, Mokhtar. And we are really fortunate that there is no electricity cut while you are participating in this meeting. In particular, thank you for reality check, starting with simple things like, electricity, which are given in, let's say, in Geneva, where we are connecting from, but also highlighting a few points like question of interpretation, multilingualism, and risk, which is realistic, that we can increase the, let's say, dominance of English language with this shift towards online communication. Relating to question of security and protocol, we started creating map for this business continuity exercise. Later on, we'll ask you to reflect more on what's going on in African Union, what are the preparations for African diplomacy. Now we move closer to Europe. We move to Sofia. With us is Ambassador Stefano Baldi, Italian ambassador to Bulgaria, based in Sofia. And for those of you who do not know, one of the pioneers in digital diplomacy, who established the first mailing list back in 1996, when he was, I guess, attaché or third secretary in Geneva. And later on, he did a lot of things in this field. Stefano, what are the activities of one diplomatic mission like your embassy in dealing with this crisis? What you can share with the rest of colleagues who are following this session today in Zoom and on Facebook. Over to you.
Thank you, Jovan. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the other participants. I'm really very glad to be here. And I'm sorry that you revealed how old I am, since a long time there in Geneva. But that's good because we are always facing new challenges, as we say. And this is definitely a new challenge. I have, while we were starting and hearing the others, it came to my mind a definition of what it is happening in our world, in the diplomatic world, not only in the diplomatic, but here we focus on that in this period. And I would call that emergency-driven innovation. That's how I would define what is happening in our way of working. And it was mentioned, some elements that I would like to draw your attention to have already been mentioned, not others. I must say, up to now, there was a lot of focus on meetings that I heard, which is normal in a way, because we are mainly talking about multilateral job that I love and I know very well since I've been 12 years in multilateral. But I see from the bilateral point of view, there are different needs also that you have to take care of, which are more or less related to some elements which are linked to the bilateral work, like the consular work, for example. But before I get there, let me tell you 3 elements that I noticed in this period, in this month and something, where we had to change our way of living, working, and thinking, that I've noticed 3 variables which are extremely important and which can explain why in some places or in some missions or in some systems you have more success than others. So it depends on how ready they were or we were concerning these 3 variables, in my opinion. The first variable was mentioned before. It's the IT infrastructure, like the bandwidth. What kind of access you could have, you had already, from your mission or from your ministry, and that is extremely important. But in the IT infrastructure, I think one other element which was very important to move into the remote working, smart working, then we have to find a definition. But in definitions we could have a full session. Then you have also the digitalization level that you have reached. So certainly in UN they are far more advanced than in many other bilateral situations or ministries. Then another big variable, that was IT infrastructure, what I call, it's the personnel skills. You work with people, and when you have to shift quickly to a different way of working, it very much depends on how ready they are or they have been prepared to shift from the paperwork to a completely remote work, not even digitalized, remote work. And this is, and here we could talk a lot about the the need of training, not now, the pre-training, but we have to think for the future. And then we have, of course, something which is part of the IT infrastructure, but that I would consider separately, which is the connectivity. So the connectivity in this case, I don't mean the bandwidth that I already mentioned, but the connectivity is the ability to keep using the tools that you have in your office, the platforms that you have in your office, also when you are at home. And this is not a given, because for security reasons, there are a lot of applications or platforms that you can use from your office because you have a VPN or whatever access, you have some software, but you cannot use from home. And then when you are asked to work from home, you cannot even access something which is extremely important for you. It can be anything. It can be administrative. It can be message system. It depends. If this was already thought, it was already ready for this kind of access. So all this has had a lot of influence in our way of working and in our capacity to guarantee a smooth transition to the work. So I will stop here because otherwise I'm being too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano, for adding to this mapping. And I just took a few notes. Well, emergency-driven innovation, a great new term, and the question of access, question of security. We have been hearing a lot from diplomats that they face this type of problems. They cannot access, let's say, Zoom or platforms because of the security reasons. I guess you're fortunate because your residence is to get close to your the office of the embassy in Sofia, but it is important element, and personal skills and the question of understanding how to use skills. You enrich this taxonomy which Mokhtar and others started on question of access, connectivity, and other issues. You're really building nice, let's say, mind map on the business continuity exercise. Now we move closer to Geneva. We are separated by the river Rhone and the lake. Christian Roy from Canadian Mission, First Secretary in Canadian Mission, is one of the most prominent cyber diplomats in Geneva. In Geneva, we have some sort of tech attaché circle, and I'm sure if we vote for the president of this circle, Christian will be voted definitely. And in our discussion within this tech attaché circle, we have been reflecting a lot on this question of business continuity. Christian, tell us what is the message from Geneva on this question of business continuity? Over to you.
I'm muted. All right. So thank you, Jovan, for inviting me on this panel today, and thank you to all the preceding speakers. It was very interesting perspectives that you've all shared with us. So for me, my answer was, completely easy transition to this new way of functioning, because one of the agencies I spend most of the time covering, which is the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, though it canceled its big decision-making meetings that were at the end of March, it still maintained the meetings of its standardization sector, so the ITUT. And so for the last 2 weeks, we had the meeting of the ITUT Study Group 17, which was completely online. So ITU had already set up something called My Workspace, which uses an open source video conferencing system called Big Blue Button. And so we've been working on that tool for the last 2 weeks. And then this week, we started the meeting of the Study Group 3. And so it was interesting because initially the Study Group 17, which is usually on cybersecurity and security matters of telecommunications, about 85% of the participants come from Asia. About 60% of those are China, the rest is Korea and Japan. And then we had a handful of Europeans and basically 1 or 2 representatives from African countries, 1 or 2 representatives from Latin American countries. And I don't think we had any small island states, either from the Caribbean or from the Asia Pacific. But the meeting went well. Of course, it functioned in English. ITU does claim to be able to have meetings with full interpretation, but it only works if they can actually bring interpreters in the building. And right now that's prohibited. So we are working only in English. But in the future, seeing as the remote participation meeting like this have worked so far, maybe you could still have the in-person meetings for those where people could come to town, but then have access for those people outside of town, and then have access with interpretation because you have the interpreters in the room at the same time. So I think that that might be something interesting for the future. But we had no problems in study group 17. You know, work items were advanced. We did some drafting for more difficult discussions. People broke off in side discussions. There were many meetings happening in parallel on different parts of the platform. So basically, it felt like a very, very normal study group meeting at the ITU. Now, this week, we started the study group 3, which is more economic and policy issues of telecommunications. And that's a study group where normally you have a whole lot more participants from African countries. So I was really, really curious to see whether or not their participation in this meeting would be effective. And I'm really pleased to say that it's actually much better than I had anticipated. Of course, you see the problems that what our colleagues from the African Union just mentioned, that, you know, with the availability of broadband is not equal. So you have some participants taking the floor, and the sound is sort of cut off a little bit. We lose them for a few minutes, they come back. And so it's a little bit laborious compared to study group 17, but nonetheless, people are getting their points across. We are making decisions. We are advancing the items that we're looking for standardization or for technical reports. So the work is progressing. Now, these are meetings which are not necessarily big decisional meetings. We have the ITU Council coming up in June. Now, if that has to move online, and people in the chat were talking about that, you know, what happens when you have to make decisions? And there's nothing in the constitution of the ITU that says that you can vote if you're not in the room. In fact, it very specifically says that if you're not in the room, you cannot vote. So how will that translate to an online meeting? Or do we just hold the meeting with the things that don't need big decisions, and then you hold off for the other part of the meeting and push them off until we can actually meet physically again? It's unclear how that's going to play out. But that is indeed a question that not just the ITU, but other agencies are going to have to grapple with if this lasts for any length of time, is how you make decisions, because typically the constitutions of these bodies or the rules of procedures imply that the national delegate has to be in the room. So that will be a bit of a challenge. I'll stop there and open for further questions.
Thank you, Christian, for introducing a few points. First difference between, and Imre later on can comment on that, between, let's say, expert group meetings, where there are many meetings in ITU on WIPO, and more bigger conferences or decision-making meetings like a GA meeting in a summit in September. That would be interesting to hear more later on, Imre, after we hear from the audience what are the questions. You also introduced the question of statutory provision and policy provisions. We at DIPLO are going through the statutes and the working instruments of different organizations. And you're right that there are in quite a few documents this indication that delegate must be in the room. There is another provision which was in the agreement between trade unions, interpreters, trade unions, that interpreters must be on the site when they interpret the meeting. This is very interesting provision. They cannot even, they can argue according to current agreement that they cannot interpret from their home. Therefore, there are those small details. I'm sure that Richard Hill here, who knows a lot of the labor law in international organization, will be quite busy after COVID crisis. Then you indicated a different type of meetings: security, economy. Excellent news that Africa is connected. We'll ask Mokhtar later on what is done in African Union to keep this good practice of the second meeting of Study Group 3. And you hinted to about the day after that we get through this COVID crisis. Are we going to have a blended meetings? It was already mentioned by Stefano, by Imre, that new innovation is happening. Therefore, we should keep it on the radar. Now, before I pass the floor to you to comment on this first set of mapping issues, I would like to invite Adriana to report from the very rich discussion in the text chat, because text chat is going in parallel. You can follow it. Well, hopefully, Adriana, you will manage to summarize it in a few minutes. Over to you.
Thank you, Jovan, for the floor. I will be trying to summarize this in a few minutes. A first question that was raised was how to apply procedures in the absence of face-to-face procedures, raised by Jorge. Vladimir asked the key question, which is it possible to implement traditional procedures in the online environment, or do we need to devise new procedures? Christian noted that this could depend on the constitution of terms of each UN agency. And then Charlene noted that the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe has drafted special rules of procedure to continue work during the pandemic through online meetings. This generated quite some interest in the chat, and she was prompted to share a draft. However, she's not certain she can at this point. She did reassure us that those special rules of procedure should be publicly available on the website by next week. Then we had a question about the UN Security Council e-votes. What remained unclear, was it teleconferencing or was it actually an e-vote? The question of interpretation gathered a lot of attention. Vladimir noted that the problem with the UN is that it should be available in all 6 languages. However, we are not sure how to switch between those 6 languages. Glenn noted that the business version of Zoom does permit the interpreters. However, the free or pro versions do not. And then the participants underlined the difference between webcasting and an interactive meeting with simultaneous interpretation. Sarah asked, what about the possibility of then organizing meetings separately for English speakers and for French speakers? She then said that it might be time for countries to identify resourceful people who are able to participate in those languages instead of demanding multilingual meetings. V. Manjun V, I'm sorry if I butchered this, asked, suggested that another possibility could be to incorporate a subtitles committee who could be translating subtitles to add on the video talkers in real time. Another concern was about, of course, privacy and security. And Vladimir noted that the biggest problems could be at first confidentiality, and then also the integrity of data that's shared. That is how to ensure the voting is not altered. But he did say that managing dialogue shouldn't be radically different in the sense of who's raising hands, the point of order, etc. We had some other questions, how to integrate collaboration tools to facilitate or enhance the conversation in official meetings by Enrico. And Muriel asked, are online conferences and meetings presenting a special challenge for the participation of the civil society? That will be it from me. Jovan, over to you.
Thank you, Adriana. Well, quite a few questions, and let's go to Imre in New York and hear his reflection on, let's say, quite a few questions related to the UN. I already raised different type of meetings. We had interpretation, we have a security, privacy. Imre, busy time for you. Over.
Yes, thank you. So indeed, let's just call it the old normal. In the old normal, of course, not all meetings were conducted in full 6-language interpretation environment. Informal meetings, drafting committees, even for the charter bodies, drafting committee meetings, some working group meetings were conducted in English only. But clearly, all decision-making sessions or official meetings of the charter bodies, they were always serviced with full interpretation. Now, the new normal, and of course, all those meetings were held on site. you had occasionally a presenter on a video link, or if other duty stations were presenting, or field operations, peacekeeping operations were presenting material that was on a video link, but the remote location, in this case, the presenter of a video link, was not having the advantages of receiving interpretation from the on-site room. So for the new normal, what we will anticipate is, it's right for now as well, and I would consider that this will survive the current crisis and will become part of the new normal. We can have scenarios when all participants and service providers are remotely located. So that would be one scenario. So service providers, the secretariat people who are normally sitting next to the chairperson of the meeting, the chairperson, the participants of the meeting servicing assistants, the documentation distribution people, and the interpreters will do their work from home, from their individual homes. Then, of course, we can anticipate a scenario where some service providers, for example, interpreters, will be on premises, will be in their established locations, in their normal environments, while some or all the participants will be remotely participating. That's one scenario. And the third scenario, when, of course, everybody is back to the old normal and everybody is on site and only occasionally a presenter appears remotely. Now, there were some questions whether any tools, any platforms allow for this. Yes, there are platforms that allow for this and could cover all three scenarios. So it is possible to provide interpretation from your home studio, or we call it kitchen interpretation, if you like. That's also possible. And I have to defend the AIC, which is the Association of the Freelance Interpreters, and they actually ready to accommodate remote servicing. The UN and the UN system organizations, we have an agreement with AIC, which also foresaw the eventuality when remote interpreting will become a reality. And actually this association, AIC, conducted a very thorough testing of a number of platforms last year, and the results are available. I shouldn't be promoting one or the other, but certainly switching between channels, having the interpreters remotely located in their homes or remotely located in a hub. These scenarios are all possible using some or another of these tools. Now, obviously, the rules of procedure of the bodies conducting meetings in the new normal will have to be adjusted, and for the duration of the current crisis, they are making provisional adjustments to their rules of procedure. As I mentioned, for example, the voting procedures, it is in writing voting. So they have a 24-hour period to officially inform the secretariat, and through the secretariat, the presiding officer of the body, to inform whether they vote yes, no, or abstain. If there is no reply, that is taken as an abstention. And then after this 24-hour period, the presidency announces the results. And then again, the procedure of explanation of votes can also take place in writing, and then everything is published eventually electronically. And the outcome also can get translated into all the languages. Mind you, the provisional nature of the rules of procedure, the Security Council for the past 75 years is operating based on provisional rules of procedure. So they just have to do another provisional rules of procedure. And the mentioning of captioning, that is also, of course, one tool to increase accessibility, and it's also some way of an archival tool, if you like, and that is also available in 6 languages. Again, to avoid crowding the screen, you would have to select your language, and of course you have to have pretty good service providers. But here again, artificial intelligence and speech to text is making great strides in advancement. Thank you.
Thank you, Imre, for this comprehensive answer. Again, quite a few things for the mapping, including question of procedure. We are currently running the online course on online meetings, and one of the topic will be adjustment of procedure. Therefore, we have about 55 students in our 2 classrooms, and maybe we'll report back to you and colleagues in the UN on what are the reflections from our students who are experienced diplomats on adjustment of rule of procedures. And you mentioned extremely important aspect is the question of access also to people with disabilities. There are 1 billion people with disabilities, and we forget that these advanced online conferencing tools like captioning can help access to this group and more inclusion of the international meetings. I just got one question which is related to our protocol, internal protocol of meetings. There was a question why we don't allow for the voice video comments from our participants. We did comparative survey, and we realized that that's much more effective to have a text chat, these dynamics, and to have a moderator bringing the question than to have too many voice and video questions. Now back to our panel. You can pick up on any question that was raised so far, but I would like to encourage you to reflect on the question of access and continuity. For example, Mokhtar, how we can sustain this good example from the third working group 3 at the ITU, and what can be done from African Union Commission and on the level of member states. Over to you, and then we'll go to Dalsie, Stefano, and Christian.
Okay, thank you, Giovanna. And I have, first of all, I have 2-3 comments before. One is with regard to the connectivity, and somebody has mentioned that it's not only the connectivity in terms of bandwidth, but also in terms of accessing those platforms that are supposed to be used from offices and so on. And that's a good point. But I'll add to that the fact that it's not only that, also that is actually one of the stopping elements, is the fact that you don't have the right computer at home. You don't have the right phone. Not everybody has that luxury. So the access to also is very important. So one thing, but I want to share with you an initiative that we have taken, the head of state of our African Union took back in 2005. In 2005, in anticipation of the progress in technology, we created what we call a VVIP network, a satellite-based network that will be used by the head of states to do their meetings, remote meetings, for those who cannot come to Addis Ababa, and to do the voting, and all those processes were actually kind of defined. But unfortunately, that network never been used and was standing idle since 2005 into 2017, and we dismantled it. I think people now regret that they have dismantled it. And I may say that wasn't an innovation driven by emergency, if I may comment that. And that's why it has been really dismantled. But also I want to also another comment with regard to the disabilities. Basically, people now are saying if you don't know internet or you don't speak English, you are ignorant. And if you are ignorant, you are a disabled person. Probably we have to categorize people, and I'm joking here a little bit, categorize people who don't speak English as probably people that have to be given specific attention in terms of really providing the tools for captioning, simultaneous interpretation, and so on. So recently, the African Union Head of State, in order to address matters of COVID-19, had organized their online meetings among the head of states to discuss the issues and the decision to be taken with regard to COVID. And I think what is still missing is to put down the right protocol that will allow them to streamline their works and address the issues of voting, of documentation, and so on. And I'm sure we'll address that soon. And this is what we are doing at this point of time with regard to the general activity of the African Union. Unfortunately, no measure has been taken really to address the matter of the African participation into the global debates and diplomacy in general, as i.e. in the UN system and other meeting that will be happening soon online. But my team and I, we are working now to do, and with the help of some partners, to learn from them how to set up the right procedures for African voices to be heard. This is what I wanted to address at this point of time, and I'll do that again to answer to this question, although I still have 7 minutes.
Thank you.
To participate. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mokhtar, for this great story about satellite connection. I think that could be a very interesting case study, proving that technology is necessary but not sufficient as it goes. Moment for the buy-in and for full usability. It brings me to quickly to Stefano. Stefano, in your 3 points, you mentioned personal skills, smart work, and something which builds on what Mokhtar said. It's not just enough to have technology. We need to have more. We need skills, awareness, inclusion in organizational dynamics. Over to you.
Thank you, Jovan. Yes, if I can connect with what just said about the satellite system and with what you're asking me, I think it just proves that even the right thing at the wrong moment, it becomes the wrong thing. So now we have a big opportunity. We can do a lot of things in the name of emergency. That's an opportunity. But we have to do the right things. And then they will become, you know, more or less stable. Now it's an experiment. Everything is admitted. I think most of the systems in the ministries, they had not to change their procedures. It would take too much time formally, but informally, they changed completely the way they were speaking. They were working. They were acting. Because if you have one embassy where you have 10 people, 20 people, 50 people, and only 3 go physically to the embassy because there are impediments, you know, you cannot go, of course you have to change completely. And the system is completely to be rethought. So we have a lot of opportunities in this. Unfortunately, and here I come to what you were asking me, you cannot really speed up knowledge in people. That takes time. That takes time. If you have people who don't use properly a mobile phone and you ask them to, you know, to be connected, it will take time before they can really use for whatever, you know, Zoom, for example, or no matter how easy it is, you know, this you have to do with the the manware, you know, not the software, not the hardware, the manware, and that takes and that's the in a way the big challenge that we have now, to do with what we have, to do things with what we have, not only technically, but also people. So I think this showed that much more should have been done in the past, but this will be a big push for the future to show that you really have to be ready, not only technically, but also with people. Thank you.
Stefano, time and timing is your, let's say, underlying element. In our course, which is going right now, we argue, and this could be an interesting question for discussion, longer discussion, that you need 1 hour or less to start, let's say, Zoom or any online meeting, but that you'll need at least 1 month to internalize the skills, the digital skills, organizational moderation, and other skills. And the course is focusing exactly on this interplay between one hour easy entry point and 1 month. And that is really some sort of illusion of a technological illusion, which could be very dangerous, especially when there are many people in the meetings and where important issues are discussed. Now we move fast forward. We have a few minutes. I may ask you for tolerance to extend the meeting for just a few minutes, which is not a good practice in online meetings, but I'm sure that you will tolerate that. We move to Dalsie. Dalsie, it's almost midnight now in Vanuatu. You have been hearing these insights on protocol interpretation access. Is there anything missing from perspective of small island states? what is missing in this toolkit mapping that we are preparing for e-participation and engagement? What can make small island states even more present in the meetings? Over to you.
Thank you. I guess quite a number of points have been, mentioned by Stefano and Mokta, and I really appreciate that. They're still promoting these challenges, which I think it's now becoming everybody's issue at the government level. And for Vanuatu, for example, one of the key that we should be focusing, and I think it's across the region as well, is transformation. In order to have the decision makers at the government level to be transformed to accept technology as one of the most effective way to do an online meeting, making decisions instead of waiting for another 2 weeks, for example. I want to support this statement. Now we are experiencing a state of emergency. So it's 1 week today. And because we are not ready in terms of online working, to work from home, and the government has to come back. The people working for the government has to return back to work to do work. Because we are not prepared, we are not ready, and more onto that is the challenge that we are facing in terms of capacity and the capability to use, for example, the platforms, the online platforms. Where do we start? And also an additional example to that is homeschooling. So, out of the whole country, whole nations, everybody's doing homeschooling. So there's only 3 schools that have access to online education. But there's still the challenge that we are facing because some of these teachers haven't trained to be, teaching online. And that's another challenge that we at the national level, we should also try to improve on that. And also talking about connectivity. Yes, I agree with Mokta and Stefano. Connectivity is also an issue. It's not an access, but the connectivity. How do you get connect with a simple device that you could communicate and, talk to the teacher, for example? That is also an issue. To do with the capacity of internet, that's one challenge, contributing factor. Also to do with the bandwidth and the price, and additionally, the limited digital literacy. Where do we press and how do we start? So quite a number of challenges that we are facing today.
Thank you, Dalsie. On the building on what Stefano said about the need for a bit of time and change of mindset, which also Dennis mentioned in the comments. Now, before when I invited Christian to join, she insisted that we have a people from the small island states and from Africa. Now, Christian, I delivered on your request. We had excellent speakers from both Africa and the small island states. Now, your comment before we ask Adriana to bring us another input from the chat, your comment from trenches of multilateral diplomacy in Geneva. Anything missing, anything to highlight or to add for the follow-up discussion?
Well, I would highlight that, so right, I have one very concrete example of a UN agency that has done everything it could to maintain its normal continuity. And so one of the things that ITU has done in particular is it has prepared a manual for participants on how to participate in an online meeting. It has done prior to the Study Group 3 meeting that started on Tuesday. On Monday, they held 2 sessions on the tool, on their My Workspace big blue button platform that they're using, where everybody joined and we all had a conversation and people were like, oh, well, how does this work? And you had some people saying, well, why don't we use video? Because this is one thing that maybe I didn't mention, is they don't use the video. They only use the screen to show the documents that we're discussing. and you can see the name of the person that is speaking above that screen, but we don't see the face. And the reason that they've chosen to operate that way is to limit the impact on bandwidth, so to ensure that you have more people in the room and less of the bandwidth is taken up by video streaming, for instance. But at any rate, that those 2 sessions of training with participants already increased the level of comfort. And I have to say, after 3 days of the meeting going on, you see that the people who asked the questions, who were the most worried during the preparatory meeting, are actually getting more and more comfortable with the use of the tool. So obviously the skill gets developed when you start applying. Practice makes perfect. So clearly you see that happening very, very well. I mean, I myself, I think, have discovered, I didn't know about Microsoft Teams. I didn't know about Big Blue Button. I'd never used Zoom the way I have now. So I have learned a lot of new tools out there. I see my children also, never functioning on Microsoft Teams, but now being able to interact with their teachers, with their school comrades. So it's really a question of getting down into the weeds and starting to do it, practicing. So I'm hopeful that, in fact, we will be able to use the technology, just like our colleague from Vanuatu said, that we will capitalize on the fact that the technology is there, that the internet is a stable resource that allows us to be able to conduct these meetings, which I think was sort of the ideal initially when people started to work on this thing that was the internet. So I think that there's it's making me hopeful, and like was said at the beginning of the meeting, I think that there will be some lasting solutions that will remain in place. And I'm hoping that the African Union brings back their emergency lines that they had set up, because that was a brilliant project. It's really unfortunate that they turned it off. Thank you.
Thank you. Mokhtar, you will have to work a lot on that. But before I ask you to give a short Twitter-style concluding remark, let us hear from what Adriana can bring us from the discussion in the text chat. Adriana. Let's see. We have some delay. Okay. While we are waiting for Adriana, let's just start with Imre. Imre, what would be your, bit longish tweet conclusion on this positive, optimistic note that we hear from Christian, and we heard also from Stefano, that crisis provides opportunities and not only risks and dangers?
Certainly. I mean, let's start with adjusting to the new normal. Just my own experience, the building is pretty much off limits only for critical staff to go in for the past 3 weeks. The first week I still went in every single day because I just felt more comfortable.
Well, first of all, I'm going to need someone to confirm you can hear me and see me.
Okay, Imre, we'll get back to you. We'll now hear quickly Adriana. Sorry for interruption. Adriana, go ahead. Okay. There is a bit of a problem of connection, or Adriana, we can leave that for the follow-up summary and we go back to Imre. Imre, you said about access to your building and your office.
Yeah, right. So even though we were encouraged to work from home, I felt more comfortable in my office. I walked in, I thought I cannot live without my 2 screens to do business, Then the second week I only went in twice. This week, I haven't gone near the building yet. So there is an adjustment, obviously. And all the others, the charter bodies themselves are going through the same adjustment at the organizational level.
I sure hope you can hear me. And
we continue with Imre. Imre, please continue.
Yeah. Okay. We have to find a solution for this. I even called it a quick and dirty solution for the next couple of months, which we will use. And then we will settle for the new normal. One will have to go through all the procurements that are involved, the technicalities to actually set us up for a more sustainable virtual operation, not just for the upcoming new crisis, but for conducting business in a more environmental sustainable manner and a more inclusive, more accessible manner. So in that respect, this gives us the necessary push to move faster than we would have moved otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us early from New York and bringing the climate change issue. For example, Swiss government decided to reduce traveling for official purposes by 30% till 2030. Therefore, there are moves which will be accelerated with the latest development. We go to Stefano, Stefano, then Mokhtar, Dalsie, and Christian. Stefano, what is your one-liner?
Yes, my final line is related to the solution that we will find to these tragic events of the epidemic COVID-19. So we know that in COVID-19 we will succeed if we all succeed. Otherwise, we will not succeed. This is the big issue. And in a very much smaller, very much smaller scale, it is the same for our future way of working. If all of us, multilateral, bilateral, central work, whatever, will do all together an effort to change, then it will be a big success. Otherwise, you will only have some islands of success and the rest will go back to normal, to the old normal, as Imre was saying, not to the new normal. So let's hope that we will move all together in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. Mokhtar.
The new normal, if I might say, demand from us to develop a sense of family. It's very important to enhance and increase our solidarity. And I'm sure with that, we will be able, certainly, to overcome all the challenges we do have, providing that we are taking into consideration the issue of safety and security. So I would emphasize safety and security in order to be able to use all those opportunities that are provided to us by technology in order to be really in a big family, having all success and meeting all the requirements that it needs and defy the challenges.
Thank you, Mokhtar, for bringing these core issues like Stefano before, dealing with the core crisis and then question of family and solidarity. Dalsie, what is the message from Vanuatu? Except that you are probably very tired and you are looking for the end of the discussion to go to sleep. Over to you, Dalsie.
Yeah, thank you, Jovan. My conclusion to this very interesting discussion is that one technological solution is not a solution for all. It may become an issue for another part of the world, but I believe strongly that new inventions or innovations will assist to specific matters raised from respective parts of the world.
Thank you, Dalsie. Back to Geneva, Christian.
All right, thank you. I'm very privileged to have the closing words in a way. So I have two ideas that I want to leave us with. First of all, I said, practice makes perfect, but obviously I'm privileged. I come from Canada. My government, my department has for a number of years now started to, invest in mobility tools. So I can take my laptop from the office, bring it home, and all the work is there, and I have, excellent connectivity with all that. So I'm in a very privileged position, and that's not the case everywhere in the world. So I think that we need to continue thinking about addressing those analog problems that were referred to in a World Bank report, I think it was 2016, where it said, it's great, we have the possibility of connect, but the analog problems at the basis of, the existing divides are still there, and until we fix those, we're not going to be able to improve on the connectivity and on the technology. And that has to do with things that Mokhtar mentioned, electricity, education, skills. So that's the one part. And the other part that I want us to think about in leaving is that if I remember my, Psychology 101 course at university, humans react more in communication. 80% of the message is carried by body language. And of course, you lose a lot of that in a video interaction where you just see this. So while I do think that digital tools will offer some great opportunities in the future, I think that we cannot forget that the physical contact will remain an important part in diplomacy, because there are some issues that are so intractable that you actually need that proximity to understand the whole of the message, which sometimes you don't get online.
Thank you, Christiane. I don't know how, but I feel the room today. Probably there is some metaphysical level of exchanging energies, but I felt the sense of hope, a sense of solidarity, sense of awareness of the importance of the crisis, but also the idea of that we have a chance, we have opportunity to reboot certain things and to create global cooperation, which is clearly needed in not only in health but in other fields, to make that global cooperation more effective. That was at least my feeling of the room. A lot of work, not only for computer scientists, but anthropologists, psychologists, sociologists ahead of us. Before I close the session, I would like to invite you to join us on Tuesday on discussion on the future of multilateral diplomacy, which will have Mr. Fabrizio Hochschild and a few distinguished speakers. And next Thursday, there will be a very interesting session focusing on cybersecurity challenges in the current situation. Without further ado, first of all, thank you for being tolerant for this extension for almost 15 minutes. Stay safe and stay tuned, and have a nice evening, well, day or morning if you are in Americas. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jovan. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.